Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so continuing on with our coverage of the Thanos Imperative, we get to the moment you've all been waiting for. The origin of the Cancerverse. How did it all start? How did we get to this point? I imagine a lot of you guys are really wanting to know what's going on. So, before we get into that, we pick up with the aftermath of the Galactus engine. And again, this is one of the coolest things. And what really shocked me when I first saw this was just how huge the Galactus engine was, right? This idea that it absolutely dwarfed like all the cosmic entities in size. But the funny thing about this is that you have like Nova and you have these guys who are really like fighting this fight and watching this whole thing go down. And in their minds, they look at the Galactus engine and it doesn't really look like it's doing anything. But the comment of the Silver Surfer is it's fighting all the cosmic entities on a different plane of existence. Now, this is why this matters. This is one of the things that you get into when it comes to the cosmic entities, right? The cosmic entities, as you perceive them, don't really exist that way. They do, but they don't. The cosmic entities are really more representations of concepts. They don't really have a true physical form. But when it comes to these conflicts with these cosmic entities, what they have are what are called M-bodies. And M-bodies are basically the physical form that cosmic entities take on that are given to them, is they go to a place called the Dimension of Manifestations. And this place is ran by a guy named Anthropomorpho. And Anthropomorpho gives them a physical body. Now, the other thing to understand here is that we don't really understand how time passes in the Dimension of Manifestations, but basically from the time they leave the main Marvel universe, go to that dimension, get a physical body and come back, is instantaneous, right? Like it happens as far as the normal human or the normal being is concerned in the blink of an eye, right? It's that quick. But that's what you're basically seeing here. So what you're seeing is not really a physical fight between the cosmic entities and the Galactus engine, so much as like a metaphysical fight, right? Kind of taking place on a higher plane. And that's why the entities are just kind of standing there, but this massive conflict's taking place because ultimately Aegis is the first one to fall. And so when she's destroyed, what you end up seeing, at least as best as people can normally perceive it, is you see like this giant being kind of break its way out from inside of her. And that's kind of how that goes down. It's a little funky and it's not what you would expect. It'd be a lot easier if it was just shooting lasers out of its eyes and hitting cosmic entities. But that was the nature of Dan Abnett writing, right? To kind of perceive it, to show it as you would normally see it. And so what this does is this goes directly into the origin of the Cancerverse itself. And what we end up doing here is picking up with Thanos and the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy when they arrive in the Cancerverse's version of Titan. Now, this is one of the things that's kind of cool, is because for the most part, it all really kind of seems to function in the same capacity. The difference here is that Vision was created on Titan. Vision was not created on Earth, right? So the indication here is that Ultron never existed, right? Because Ultron was the one who created Vision, who in turn was sent to attack the Avengers. The Avengers basically swayed Vision to their side, and then Vision and the Avengers defeated Ultron. Here, it doesn't seem to have been the case. Now, what we're basically given here, when Vision's talking to everybody, Thanos and Vision kind of come to this realization, right? Thanos says only one of two things possibly could have happened in this universe that led to endless life. Either it means life itself has somehow been empowered, right? So people have somehow found a way to make themselves immortal, or, and as Vision puts it, death was killed. And that's what you end up getting here. Now, the funny thing about this is you kind of have to read between the lines, and you have to read very closely to really understand what Dan Abnett's saying and what's going on, which is why I'm here. So what ended up happening in this universe, what ended up happening in this universe here is that Marvel, as much like this, the main Marvel universe, ended up developing cancer. Now, in the main Marvel universe, Marvel died, right? It was a story in 1984 called The Death of Captain Marvel. It was a landmark story in Marvel Comics. A lot of really old Captain Marvel fans love it, but the idea was that Marvel had essentially developed cancer and then died from it. But the idea here is that in this event, in the way that this takes place, is that unlike the main Marvel universe, where Marvel simply succumbed to his cancer, surrounded by all of his superhero friends, more or less, that what had happened was he had basically been reached out to by the many-angled ones. The many-angled ones contacted him and said, you can live if you kill death. It's the only way to ensure that you survive. And so kind of being corrupted by them and basically falling down and kind of becoming this guy that fell to his darker side, right? Because in the main Marvel universe, it was Marvel more or less accepting it once the time came and saying, this is the natural order of things. This is the way things are supposed to go. I know it sucks, guys, but hey, you win some, you lose some. And so because of that, in this instance, he didn't do that. He gave in to his weaker self, his desire to live. And so ultimately took the hands of all the various superheroes who were there and then modified them in such a way to where they became the versions that you see now. And then following that, basically empowering them, they ended up killing the avatar of death. They ended up sacrificing him in what was in a ritual called the necropsy, which basically led to its destruction. Now we're kind of led to believe, because the ceremony took place on Sanctuary, which is the ship of Thanos, that in that universe, the avatar of death was Thanos as well. We're not explicitly told who it was. We're simply just told that the avatar of death was destroyed. The result here is that with this avatar being destroyed, so too was Mistress Death. It had kind of a shockwave. Mistress Death died in this alternate reality, and the result was that nobody could die die anymore. But the side effect of this, and what it did, is it allowed the many angled ones to pour into that universe. And when that happened, everybody became corrupted by their power, and everybody ended up becoming the most evil and dark versions of themselves. Hence the reason why you see them acting the way that they do. And so that's how this entire universe came into existence, is because death was basically destroyed in an alternate reality. Now, it's interesting, and it kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom, because what we've seen in the years following this story is that Mistress Death can't die, right? So during the incursions, the collapse of the multiverse, Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, Mistress Death was the one cosmic entity the Beyonders couldn't kill, so long as, people could die and so on and so forth. Now, the reality is she kind of served the role as a plot device in that story. The multiverse had to end, and so it was kind of hard to destroy and kill everything in the multiverse if nothing can die, right? So it kind of made sense to keep Mistress Death alive on that score. But the fact remains here that ultimately the actions of Thanos and the Guardians of the Galaxy draw the attention of Mar-Vell when a kind of message of sorts is received, in the sense that like their team that was there has essentially been destroyed, communication's been cut off, and of course Scarlet Witch ends up sending a team to investigate following that. And so the cool thing about this, and this is one of the reasons why fans loved Richard Rider so much, again kind of capitalizing what we had before, was that following the front line of the fall, right, like following the destruction of Aegis, the fact that all these forces are there, for the most part it sent the entire United Front into retreat, more or less. Everybody panicked, right, because like a cosmic entity was obliterated now, and the question being asked was, if a cosmic entity could be destroyed by this Galactus engine, what chance does anybody else have? And so while they have kind of retreated, it's not really giving up, it's simply the Allied Council of War, right? It's coming together and saying, okay, what's the next step? What do we do now? Now, there's a lot of infighting that ends up going on there, right? Because Medusa is essentially like the new ruler of the Kree, since Black Bolt's out of commission and basically missing following the events of the war in Realm of Kings. So she's the one ruling in his stead, but she's a new ruler as far as anybody else is concerned. So the old kings don't really see her as somebody who's battle hardened or experienced, and don't really have a whole lot of respect for her. At the same time, you've got like Blastar, who's basically like a war chieftain, more or less. So he's fine with just pillaging and plundering everything. You have all these different ideologies in terms of how these guys function. And ultimately, where they're all squabbling amongst themselves, Richard Rider is the one who shows up and says, everybody shut up. We got to figure out what we're going to do here. And it's one of the cool things, because when it comes to these kind of war councils, these kind of war chieftains, more or less, that what it really comes down to is how authoritative can you be? How much command can you respect? And then like, do you have it together? And that's why Richard Rider, people who read his character, who picked up with Annihilation, loved him, because at the beginning of Annihilation, he wasn't really careless and reckless so much as a guy who was just there and didn't really understand the full gravity of how bad things could get. But then when the entire Nova Corps was obliterated, right, he was the only one left, he had to rise to the challenge. He had to rise and become like the best version of himself. And so for people who followed his character, what they saw was the character of Richard Rider evolving and growing. Ultimately, what ends up happening here is that in the face of what's going on, Richard Rider basically says, look, there's a couple of things that I picked up. With the destruction of Aegis, this kind of telepathic energy basically resonated in me and gave me a kind of cosmic awareness, and let me realize that what's going on here is that while we're fighting on this whole front, that the forces of Mar-Vell himself are basically traveling around, and they're gathering various individuals who in some form or fashion have been touched by death. And so we have to basically grab these guys, because we have to figure out what's going on here and what the grand scheme of this guy Mar-Vell is, because what's going on here is not the end game. That's not the main goal of what's going on. And so what you end up getting here is a kind of coming together, if not a slight bit of a return, of a group called the Annihilators. Now, the Annihilators were a ridiculously overpowered team, right? It was ridiculous how powerful they were, right? You had Quasar, who's a cosmic being. You had Beta Ray Bill, who's basically like this super powerful Thor. You had Gladiator. It essentially speaks for itself. Silver Surfer and Ronan the Accuser. They were the original Annihilators, and they were hugely powerful. Nova bringing them together is cool, but the idea of the Annihilators was designed to be a kind of extension of the Guardians of the Galaxy, right? In the sense that Star-Lord wanted a team following the events of Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest that would serve the purpose of like protecting the galaxy and even the universe from various threats that were out there. The problem is that with the Guardians themselves, while they were interesting and they were cool and they were composed of some various members, they weren't all powerful. What you needed was a team that was insanely powerful. And so forming the Annihilators did that, because what you're talking about here are some of the most powerful beings in the entirety of Marvel Comics. Like the Annihilators themselves could take on pretty much all comers, right? I mean, these guys were insanely nuts in terms of the abilities they possessed. And so as a result of that, this team is designed for the mission, and really for a strike force of going in and basically grabbing all these individuals who have been taken by Lord Mar-Vell and his forces, to basically try to complete the necropsy by killing what they believe to be the Avatar of Death, to get in, get out, and basically do what they can. And so following that, what you end up doing is jumping back to the Cancerverse itself. And this is when things go awry, because with everything that's happening here and everything going on, Thanos understands a couple things. The first is that going through with this mission to basically undo the necropsy, right, to bring death to the various forces of the Cancerverse, means going back to where it all started, right, where the original necropsy took place on Sanctuary, and then essentially taking out Mar-Vell or whoever else they can by introducing death to them. But it may also be one of those things where there's no coming back from this, right? Like Thanos may actually end up dying here if Mistress Death decides to reverse her impact and make him mortal again. And so if that's the case, then what he wanted to do is basically settle all debts. That's basically what's going on here. And because Drax the Destroyer just kind of been muttering to himself the entire time and expressing this desire to kill Thanos, which has not gone unnoticed, Thanos' response is, if there's something you want to say, then say it, man. Like, if you got something to say, bring this beef to the table, we can cook it, right? We can grill it. We can deal with this, you know, and it'll turn out one of two ways. One of us ain't gonna walk out of here alive, and I'm the only one here who's really immortal. Do what you gotta do. And like a fight breaks out between the two of them. Now, initially you have like Mantis and Cosmo trying to step in. Cosmo, of course, being the Russian cosmonaut dog with telepathy. He's really, really cool, but they basically try to intervene using their telepathy or using the ability of Mantis to manipulate emotions, and it doesn't work, right? Because their power is just way too beyond that, right? Like Drax is really able to kind of block telepathic attacks, and Thanos, he's just so powered up now, so amped up that he can't really be defeated or can't really be calmed down or controlled by any kind of telepath out there, barring, you know, Jean Grey as a Phoenix Force or something like that. And so where you have Drax who basically attaches a kind of antimatter device onto Thanos, that what this does is it literally emits antimatter energy, right? Like this idea that once antimatter comes into contact with positive matter, it'll basically wipe it out and it'll cease to exist. And so when that's the case, this device is attached to Thanos. Drax fulfills his mission and his idea of killing Thanos and keeping him dead, and basically eradicates him, kills Thanos on the spot, basically destroying everybody's hopes of being able to defeat all the forces of the Cancerverse. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.